Okay, so don't mistake my somewhat casual, relaxed vibe here for lack of importance of the subject matter that we're going to talk about, because obviously you're all here because you're highly intrigued about royalties and probably have far more questions than we're going to get through tonight. But this, and just to kind of gauge this, just the concept of royalties in a license arrangement is new phone, sorry, is just one subset of an entire licensing arrangement. Unfortunately, I think it's the piece that people tend to focus on first and foremost, and that's really the bad approach. You know, there are a lot of other things to consider, a lot of other factors in play that all have to come before we even get down to this discussion. So just kind of keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. This is not a fully and in-depth, from cradle to grave viewpoint of royalties. This is just some high-level data points for you. Do you thinking about some of the things that you do need to think about when you are ready to start thinking about royalties. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so with that kind of caveat, you know, again, there are a lot of complexities involved, and you're going to kind of get a feeling for some of that in this discussion. So I've kind of thrown up, along with the New Year's resolution, you know, money, 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 and you know, also let me kind of preface this. Royalties alone aren't going to make you rich. Okay, don't think that simply licensing your product, you're all of a sudden going to become an overnight millionaire. Go try your chances at the lottery before you really get comfortable on that path. Okay, so royalties essentially are payments made to the owners of intellectual property for the right to commercialize or use that intellectual property. And intellectual property, if you don't know, are trademarks, patents, copyrights, know-how. Those are the primary areas of intellectual property. And when I say pay for the right to use or pay for the right to commercialize, there's actually more aspects than that. The term use is actually just a very narrow part of it. In fact, use is one of the many divisible rights that you as a patent owner or copyright holder or trademark holder have in ways to carve up how your IP is going to be used. So take use in a very short kind of context. You know, there are a lot of advantages for, you know, entering into a licensing arrangement. I've put a few of the more common ones up here for you. You know, when I say it's quick and easy entry into the marketplace, you know, that's also a caveat, right? Because nothing is ever truly quick and easy. It takes a lot of effort to get a licensing deal, to enter into one, to make it work. And so when I say it's an easier barrier to entry to the marketplace, it's easier in the sense of you yourself are not undertaking all of the requirements and responsibilities to commercialize your product and get it in the marketplace. That's what I mean by quicker and easier route to market rather than using all those things. Thereby, it has a lower capital investment requirement on your part to get your product to market versus if you had to go through all of those steps to commercialize it by, you know, manufacturing and supply chain and distribution and marketing and all of those things that are highly costly to getting the product to market. And thereby, because you have that lower investment cost, you have a greater return on your investment. Your investment being the time, money, and effort that you then put into getting your IP ready for licensing. And as if you were here in last month's discussion and have seen any of our previous videos and presentations on patenting and licensing, you know, we've talked at nauseum sometimes on, what are those steps and what are those costs to not only obtain a patent, but then to defend it. So, but overall, those costs, to get your IP protected versus getting a licensing deal and then getting your product to market are mitigated by then allowing for a greater return on it, on your ROI, essentially, right? So even if it costs you $20,000, $30,000 to secure all of the patent or IP protection that you need, that's literally a drop in the bucket compared to what it would take you to personally commercialize your product. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
For sure.
And then inevitably it becomes a passive income stream, meaning you're not the one out there breaking, yourself every day, pounding the sand, doing whatever you need to do to get the product sold. You should have some interest and ability to help maintain, its opportunity to make money and maintain commercialization, but you're not the one having to incur all that. And so it becomes somewhat passive because at that point you can sit on your couch and collect an income stream, but again, it's not a get rich quick, it's not an overnight millionaire kind of thing. Okay? And then kind of lastly, if you're a serial inventor, this is an opportunity for you to invent, potentially license, move on to something else, right? And so it opens up opportunities for you to do other things with your lives other than run a business. You kind of leave that up to somebody else to do for you. Any questions on any of that thus far? Yes?
I don't have a question about that, but will we be able to get your presentation via email if we request it?
If you request it, I will send it.
Thank you.
We're also videotaping this and it'll be available on our website.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Advantages from a licensee's perspective. Oh, did I go back? Yep, sorry. From a licensee's perspective, which is who you're going to license your intellectual property to. So remember, there's always two sides to every story, two sides to the arrangement. But, disadvantages for you as, the licensor also exist because now you're kind of turning over control of your intellectual property to somebody else in hopes that they're going to be successful with that intellectual property and get it and reach some level of commercial success. So, just like when you own a home and you decide to move out and rent it to somebody else, you still own that home, but you lose a lot of direct control over what goes on inside that house. You have a rental agreement, you have rules, you're still the landlord, but you don't always know exactly what's going on inside that house. And, it's kind of the same way here. The contract will allow you certain controls and mechanisms over your IP, but, at the end of the day and on a daily basis, you really don't have that direct control over what's going on. You're also relying on somebody else to take that product, take that IP and commercialize it to some level of success. Your idea and their idea of what that success criteria is can be miles, if not worlds, apart. And so part of the licensing arrangement is really understanding what are those agreed upon terms that you both can effectively say you're both doing what you say you're going to do. The poor strategy or execution as well as product success. So here's where it can really bite you. If they develop an inferior product, it's really going to be hard for you to then take that IP back and go commercialize it with someone else or on your own. And the rebranding efforts and all the things that you're going to have to do to overcome any bad publicity or bad taste in someone's mouth is going to be really, really difficult for you. And so it's not that it's a one-shot deal, but in today's society with the internet and everything widely known and widely available, if a particular product gets bad publicity, it's bad publicity, right? And so even if you recall it or somehow you get another product out to market that's a better quality than what what your first partner did, you're still going to suffer some consequences. You're not only going to suffer consequences with respect to the product and the brand, But timing wise, depending on what that product is, how it exists in the market, you may lose opportunities there because maybe it's novelty, maybe it's not so unique, maybe it's easily or readily knocked off. All those are lost opportunities that you then are sacrificing. So that's something else to think about. And then of course payment issues, right? So even though you're going to have an income stream coming in, or allegedly coming in, doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to come in. You may have to continually monitor and manage and audit and do a lot of work to make sure that you get your nickels and dimes and quarters on those regular term bases, and continue to put in the effort to not only ensure that you're getting your money and getting paid, but they're doing the things that they need to do to sell that product to then ensure that you're going to get money to get paid. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Let's see. Did I skip one? No. Okay. So just to kind of recap on IP, so from a copyright perspective, what I've put up here is a sample. Again, this is not a one-size-fits-all. This is not a universal clause, but this is a general clause that you would see in a licensing arrangement were you to license any copyrights that you have. Are you all familiar with what a copyright is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sure? Yes? Okay. So, with respect to copyrights, that's anything you basically reduce to print or media, materials, plays, with respect to your product, it could be video materials, it could be collateral, it could be testimonials, those types of things, if you've in fact gotten that far in your process. But if you were to license any of your copyrights, this is generally some of the language that you would see. And on the bottom, I highlighted some key terms. These are all going to be these are key terms, key words that are going to have specific definition to them in the contract. They mean something very specific that, again, you and whoever you're going to license with understand and fully agree to. So when we talk about this, what I want to kind of also point out is, exclusive versus non-exclusive. Big deal, because in one instance you could, in the exclusive arrangement, that's just like being married. You're signing up to be, monogamous and enter into an exclusive singular relationship with that prospective licensor. And should things not go well and you end up at breakup point, again, it's a lost opportunity, right? Because all that time you could have been out dating and meeting other people and doing other things. And or you can carve out different licensing arrangements with different entities based on a number of factors. For instance, you see territory in here. If you have some intellectual property that has protections not only here but in other foreign countries, but the company that you want to partner with is only in the United States, and they have no plans to expand and have no coverage internationally, you would not want to give them exclusive worldwide license, because now you've just limited all your other opportunities outside of the United States. Okay? So all the relationships that you could have had outside the U.S. and all the other ports and countries, now you're barred from doing any business there. And that's just detrimental to the overall commercialization of your IP. Same thing with non-sublicensable. So in a moment I talked about, you lose some relative direct control over your intellectual property when you license it to someone. So using the same analogy I used before, you own the home, you move out, you're going to rent it to someone, you have a rental agreement with that person, it says only you and your dog are going to live here, and you're not going to have parties, and you're not going to move in a sub-renter or anyone else, and then you come to find out somebody else is living in the house. Could be they've moved out entirely and are subleasing it, or they may just have a bunch of other people living in the house. In a sense, that's what sub-licensing does. It then allows that person you've done business with to transfer those rights to somebody else, and now you've got almost no visibility, if any, to who is actually utilizing your intellectual property, which can be very damaging and very harmful. The other things I'm not necessarily going to get into tonight, but there are things that maybe on future discussions we'll talk about. Yeah.
Why would that be harmful as long as you're still making a profit?
Because you don't have any of that control, you don't have any visibility, you don't know what they're doing with it, you don't know inevitably where that leads to it being an inferior quality product. You could be losing money, there could be stuff selling out a back door that you don't know about. There's just a lot of things to consider. Yes?
I've had a design patent with the patent people for over a year, which of course is typical. And I got advice that I should also trademark what I have. It's a design, and it gives me additional protection. Is that true?
In some instances it can be. In some instances you can obtain IP protection in certain areas, but only specific to certain aspects of it. So it won't cover the exact same thing. It'll cover different elements of it.
Well, this is something that we manufactured and then wholesale.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the protection that you get on a copyright, a
Right.
trademark, or a patent are different rights. They can all apply to the same product, but in different aspects, covering different things.
Is it a good idea to also copyright?
If you're able to. Whatever protections that you can possibly seek on your IP, I would urge you to seek them. So make sure that you're consulting with someone to figure out what all of your opportunities are, because the more IP that you can, collect around your, your IP or your invention, the better. Right?
The other thing is, I sent it to the U.S. Patent Office. It's something that could be knocked off. Should I have international patents at some point?
I'm sorry, repeat the question?
I applied in the United States, the U.S. Patent Office.
Okay.
Should I also think about patenting in other locations?
China?
In foreign countries?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. So the question is, he's filed for a patent in the United States, and should he file in foreign countries? And that's a personal question. So it depends on what are your plans. If you have no plans to sell internationally, and you're not barred from obtaining foreign coverage, then certainly you could seek that route. But that's on an individual basis and largely based on what your plans are.
It's something that's easily knock-offable.
You can spend $500,000 patenting it the
Yeah,
whole world
I would
wide
advise you to
over,
speak with
so-
your agent.
And China will not be, anyway.
Kind of related to that, is it typical or not unusual if you have, let's say, U.S. protection or patent, and you have a contract working with a licensee that's like Mattel, that covers worldwide? Is it unusual for me to leverage, say, okay, I'll agree with you, because you license my product, but you gotta, everything you sell, not just in the U.S., but worldwide. Is that unusual?
It's not unusual, and there are other things that you need to consider to go along with that. So the question was, if he were to license to someone like a large multinational corporation, but he's only obtained protection in the United States, if you're not barred from obtaining protection in other countries, what you can work into your licensing deal is, hey, Mattel, I'll give you, or anyone else, I'll give you a license for the U.S., and we can expand that, or you have the right to expand that if you help me with the cost to go maintain those protections and obtain those other protections in the other countries. So you can work that into your arrangement, and we'll get into that part a little bit later. So trademarks, again, trademarks is another area of IP where you can obtain protections that become valuable. I will caution, however, when you're going down the road of licensing, this one is not necessarily as valuable if you don't already have brand awareness either for yourself or as a company, or if you've gone so far as to do something towards getting this product commercialized. Because the reality is that, whatever you decide to call your company today or your product today, or what you think it should be called, and you want to get a trademark on it, Widget Co. or the most fabulous widget in the world, whoever you're going to partner with from a licensing perspective probably won't use it. And so while they're not very costly to obtain, it doesn't hurt you to do it, but in the long run, you're probably not gonna be in a position to really license your trademarks all that much. Again, because the prospective licensee is probably not going to use it unless there's a really viable reason for them to do so. A lot of the terms here in this sample provision are similar to what you saw in the copyright provision. They vary. They're not exactly the same, but there is some, duplicity here, so, or duplicate language here. The one variable is licensed mark and licensed product, so when you get into trademarks, we're talking about the very specific marks around that product that they're going to use, how they're going to use them, where they're going to use them, and at this point in stage, you probably want to identify, at least categorically, what that licensed product is going to be. So if it's a clicker thing, whatever you call these, presentation clicker, I'm going to license you to use my mark to produce, use my intellectual property to produce a presentation clicker, right? That's how you would kind of refer to this. Otherwise, if you don't have some boxes around or framework around or guardrails around what it is that they get to do and how they get to do it, then you could find it in areas that you did not intend and that you're not going to be paid for. So you want to make sure you understand that as well. Patents. Yeah, is your hand up? Or?
No.
Okay. So patents and know-how. Know-how you don't really hear a lot of. It's kind of more of the methodology or, how you came to derive in a certain process or some trade secret aspect of it, which can be licensed. I don't see it so much these days, but I have in the past. Particularly, this focuses more on the patent side of, what you would typically see in a licensing arrangement. So this clause is quite in-depth and introduces additional concepts and terms here. For instance, you see upfront fee, advance, affiliates and subsidiaries, field of use. And so kind of just recapping some of those down here. Upfront fees and advance, we're going to get into that a little bit later in the presentation. Licensors, affiliates, those are the brothers, sisters, cousins, nephews from the corporate perspective of who you're doing business with. It's always a good thing to know, when you're entering into a partnership or relationship with someone, also who you're wedding. Right, so just like when you get married to a partner, you're not just marrying that person, you're marrying their whole entire family. And in a corporate world, it kind of, you fall into that sense as well, unless, again, you put some guardrails around that. Most companies these days have an affiliate or more and one or more subsidiaries. And it's good to know who they are, where they are, and to what degree they're going to be engaged or involved in this licensing deal. So you may want to make sure you know who those people are, so you're not caught off guard. The field of use is just as important, if not more important, in my opinion, as understanding the territories and the regions, because field of use can be very, very useful in helping carve up and creating market expansion for you. So I don't know how many of you were here last month. We spotlighted one of our inventors. She's not here tonight, but she has fans in the audience, and I'm one of her biggest fans. Ruth. Ruth is well on her way to commercializing her bedsheet products. And without recapping all of last month, it's a product that has viability both in the consumer space, something that you or I would buy, as well as the commercial space in multitude of areas such as, hospitality, hotels and industry, clinician or hospital facilities and things like that. So when we talk about field of use, when you're licensing or working on a licensing arrangement with someone, you would say, I'm going to allow you to take my intellectual property and I'm going to get back to this in a minute, use it in a commercialization aspect in the United States, but only in this market, right? Because that's the only place they play. If they don't play everywhere that you want to play, keep them in their sandbox. And this helps keep them in their sandbox so that then you can go find somebody else to partner with in their sandbox. So it's kind of like having your cake and eating it too, or in the case of Utah, having more than one relationship. Because you're not forced to be monogamous in that aspect. And in the sense that you can do that, you can greatly maximize your potential for commercializing your product without having to put all your eggs in one basket. Does that make sense? Okay. So field of use is very important. So whoever you're working with, if they don't talk to you about field of use or category, shame, shame, shame on them and you, because you're going to be screwed. No other way to say it.
They should just naturally give you the best advice, I hope.
You would hope. You would hope, but I can't speak for everyone. I also want to talk about, going back to my comment earlier about intellectual property and other aspects of intellectual property having divisible rights. Each right has to be separately offered. Okay? You can't say, I'm going to give you a license to use. What does use mean? It means a lot of things, but not what you think it means, right? So you have to be specific. So in here, I think this has a little thingy on it. Well, I'm not going to push it because I don't know. Here, get my little legs off here. Make, have made, use, offer for sale, sell, distribute, promote, import. There's also export. There's also other characteristics that you would see. Those are all divisible rights. And they're very important to be clear on both parts as to what you can and cannot do. If you leave one out, you could be faced with some serious deficits in your licensing arrangement. The import-export is a big one. Make, have made. So the distinction between make and have made is you licensing it to you, thinking you have all the opportunity to make it, come to find out you need somebody else to help make it or help produce it, right? So it's using kind of either a contract manufacturer or some other third party to help you make it. That's kind of the have-made aspect of it that you have to be really clear and understand, you know, again, who's involved in what aspect of this deal. So make sure that, and again, this is not all of the elements in that you would normally see in a licensing deal. This is just some of them, and I just threw some up there together. If they were all in here and all the aspects of what just this one paragraph or below, it would be off the page. Okay? So, the offer for sale, the distribute, promote, again, you have to understand who's going to be in the chain. So, the person who might manufacture may then turn around and sell that wholesale to some distributor, who then is going to sell to some wholesaler, who then is going to sell to some retailer. They might not all be the same party. They may be affiliates, they may be subsidiaries, or they may even be third parties, unaffiliated or indirectly related with the person that you, or the company you think you're doing business with. And you really need to understand who those players are. I know I'm saying this over and over and over because I cannot stress it enough. Okay? Any questions on that, any of that?
Not
Yes.
a question, but a comment. So you probably should just bring your lawyer with you when you're signing any licensing agreement, because as a first inventor, this would be very overwhelming. I would be definitely overwhelmed.
Yeah, I know that there are so many books out there, Licensing 101, Licensing for Dummies, or whatever those things are. Go at your own caution. I'm sure there's a book like that on how to fly an airplane. I wouldn't read a book and fly an airplane. I wouldn't read a book and then try to think I can do licensing if I've never done it before and that's not my field or that's not my specialty. That's go at your own risk. And in my opinion, they say for dummies for a reason, because you're going to suffer some consequences being your head against a wall because
Right.
you that's the road that you take. I always, I recommend you work with someone who has direct experience in licensing before you go down this route. Otherwise, good luck to you.
Yeah.
You might as well go to the altar without knowing who you're marrying. I know that was a TV show for that now too.
Yes,
So,
I think so.
okay, so royalties, all of that. Why did I need to talk about all that? Because you need to know where the royalties are coming from. That's just step one. That's foundational information. So royalties and how they're calculated, how they're configured, how they're drawn up in agreement. Again, there is no one size fits all. There are a lot of factors to be taken into consideration. Just generally speaking, royalties are based on sales rather than profits. Okay, I'm gonna let that sink in. Sales rather than profits. How many companies that you know of that exist today sell product but are not profitable? How many of you taken Uber? How many of you bought off Amazon?
Tesla.
Huh?
Tesla.
Tesla, right? Not profits. If you base your royalties on profits, you're not going to see money coming in for a long time, if ever, potentially. Because now you're saying, take your paycheck, for example. How disheartening is it when you look at your paycheck and say, wow, gross is great. Net? Net sucks. Net after you pay your mortgage and your utilities and your daycare and your car insurance and your car payment, then where are you at the end of the day after that, right? For some people, it's paycheck to paycheck. For some people, it's even negative. Companies work the same way. If you think that you're going to get paid off after profits, you're making a fundamental, gross, huge, horrific, any acronym like that you can say, mistake. Okay? So let's be very clear on that. Because that's the only way you're going to have some guarantee of getting some money mailed to you. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So, and they're typically agreed on as a percentage of gross or net sales. And I'm going to talk about the distinction between gross or net, just like your paycheck. So I want you to keep that analogy in mind. Just like your paycheck, right? Before all those deductions come out. There's a big difference between where that starting number was and where it ended up. All those deductions and things that came out of it, right? Again, this works the same way. When we talk about how they're paid, generally, there's a way to calculate it on actual sales volume, product volume,
We got it.
forgot it. Oh well, it'll come back again. But anyway, there are various units or measurements that can be applied to calculating or determining what that royalty looks like after all these other factors are considered. But generally, it's a percentage of something.
How do you keep track of how much they sell?
We'll get back to that
You get that later?
Yeah.
Licensing.
So, and then when you talk about a royalty interest, right? So that's really just the right to collect your royalty stream, your payment, right? So you have an interest in, that product, and there are certain tax implications for all that, which I'm not going to get into because I'm not a tax person. But basically, you hold an interest, just like kind of like an annuity or a lottery winner. Sometimes you don't get paid all at once. You can take the lump sum or You can take the annual annuities or monthly annuities, kind of works the same way. You have an interest in a stream that may be coming. So from a tax basis or wherever you need to report income, when they say other sources of income, that's where that's going to go into that little other bucket. So from a tax standpoint, lots of implications. Please talk to a financial advisor. I am not going to give you any tax or financial advice. I do words, not numbers, for a reason, because I still use my hands to count to 10. And so please make sure that you're consulting a tax advisor before you close a licensing deal, so you understand how you're going to be impacted for your own personal interest. Second to that is make sure that you also talk to a legal professional about whether or not you should form an entity and how to protect yourself on that basis. Because there are a lot of implications that go into doing deals as an individual versus as a company, an LLC versus an S Corp or L Corp or any of those things. In a prior presentation that you can find on our website, we did a whole presentation on how to choose an entity and formation of an entity. So if you want to go back and look for that, that certainly will be helpful for you. But again, make sure that you understand some of those things also before you enter into a deal.
My patent attorney had me immediately form a company, an LLC, transfer the patent to that company.
Yep,
So I think that's just what you do.
generally speaking. Yep. So here's another long paragraph. Again, not universal, not one size fits all, but generally a definition for net sales. So again, comparing that to your paycheck, it's not what you thought you were going to make, not what they said when they hired you you're going to make. It's what you end up coming home with at the end of the day. So from a corporate perspective or product selling perspective, that's whatever allowable deductions that come out of that. And some are general to products and product commercialization, and some are extraneous. So you want to make sure that you exclude the more extraneous ones, because those are just going to chip away at your margins, right? You want to keep it limited to only the ones that are absolutely necessary and are more general to calculating net sales. So, there are discounts in certain industries or trades that are reasonable or customary. When it comes to retail versus wholesale, there's some generally reasonable and customary discounts or ranges that apply. Depending on whether you're manufacturing outside of the country and importing into the U.S. or exporting out of the country, you may have to deal with some tariff situations. Depending on where you sell and how you sell, there are definitely tax implications from a sales tax perspective. In certain cases, there may be some other, use taxes that you need to talk to your accountant about and how those things are calculated, and to make sure that when you're working with your prospective licensee, that, you have those conversations with them around, okay, if you sell products today, what's your return rate on the products that you manufacture? What's your warranty policy? What is your return policy? What's your warranty policy? Everyone can have a policy, but then how much of those actually utilized? So, what is the return rate? How often is a customer returning stuff, and how long does it take them to return stuff? And do you want to allow returns? Because at the end of the day, you're not the one that made it. So it's almost a key kind of red flag kind of thing. If they go, oh yeah, we would take returns all the time, or our return rate, is higher than the industry standard, or whatever the case may be, then they're probably not producing a quality product. And so again, that's going to have other repercussions, for you downstream. So you want to kind of think about that as well. Transportation costs, goods, transporting goods across the United States into or outside of is not cheap. Michelle can attest to that. And then other credits, again, all affect what you thought you were going to get and what you ended up with. It's the difference between dollars, quarters, nickels, dimes, and even pennies. Okay, so really make sure that you understand and be very clear. When you draft it, when you're working on a contract, and they go, it is going to be 5% of net sales, that everything that can be attributable or discounted or negated from that number is in here. Because if it's not in here, it does not count. And you want to make sure that this is as short as possible. Okay? Any questions on that?
So you wanna see our gross sales then, basically, to cover yourself, right?
Yeah, it's good. It's very difficult to get gross sales. It's
Or profits, let's say profits and gross sales, let's say, right?
profits is detrimental to you as
Gross
a
sales, excuse me, gross sales, I'm saying.
right. Gross sales, it's not impossible, but it's highly improbable that you're going to get someone to give you on gross sales because of the costs that go involved to producing that product. You can do it based off cost of goods, which is different, but that's the discussion that you need to have.
So most companies do the net sales.
Yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So, other things that you need to be cautious and think about is particularly if you're in a channel where there's paid commissions. You know, you got sales reps or you got distributors that have, you know, that derive their income from selling your product or distributing your product or promoting your product. You know, those are all, you know, deduction-based items, and you want to make sure that you're not paying for those commissions. You know, those people get paid to do a job, and that shouldn't come from your royalty rate. You also want to think about when is the product considered sold, right? So again, another critical definition of when you say it's sold versus when they say it's sold can be two different things, particularly from a GAAP, that's an accounting principle. From a revenue perspective, sold means various things depending on the product and the service that's being delivered. So in some cases, sold doesn't happen until it's shipped, received, installed, and used, and even training in some respect, right? Then it's considered sold, which means then they can invoice the customer and then hopefully get paid on time, and then you get your cut. So you want to make sure you really understand from their accounting perspective, when do they consider the product sold, so that you know also when you're looking at your royalty reports and you're doing your audits, you can say, oh, so many units shipped in this month, but I didn't show up in my royalty report in this quarter. Well, because their process for delivering goods or whatever didn't match up to whatever that quarter was, because you didn't understand what their sales cycle was and how, from an accounting practice, their definition of sold applies. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So let's see. Yeah, okay, bundle, loss leading. So these are all good and bad things, right? So if you think about the razor blade model, do you all understand how that works? Okay. So the razor manufacturers, the Gillettes and whomever else of the world, they are giving away the razor usually, or at a very reduced cost, because they're upcharging you on the replacements, the razor blades, right? And a lot of times, obviously you'll see you can buy the razor as a standalone, a razor with 1 or 2 cartridges, a razor with a 6-pack of cartridges, and then a whole pack of 10, 20, 50, or 100 razors, blades by themselves, right? So you understand how that works. So that's kind of the bundling approach. And so depending on how your product fits into that bundle, right? So, I don't see anything up here. In the razor blade model, you know, you're probably both, right? Your IP is probably blended or controlled by both of those aspects of it. So you're not really losing necessarily from an IP perspective. But where you're losing is how they bundle and the cost difference between one bundle versus the other bundle, right? So one may be $12.99 and then $6.99 and $3.99. So how those are all sold all have a different factor as to how your royalty rate is calculated, again, based on net sales, right? So the one selling at $12.99 and you're at 10% net sales, great. The one that's bundled at $2.99, you may see a higher volume of that because more people buy that predominantly because it's cheaper, but your rate on a $2.99 versus a $12.99, big difference, right? So you should understand that. It also factors in when you're not the only piece or part of that bundle. So if you look at a lot of electronics or digital items, you may be one piece or part of that. And so you don't necessarily, know or control how it's being bundled. So, those are questions that you definitely want to ask up front. Okay?
Would it ever make sense to just structure your payment stream, like for instance, $1 per widget sold? It doesn't matter what they sell it for or who they sell it to or how they bundle it. Is that ever the case that that's easier?
It's one way to do it. May sound more simple, but but when you do it that way, you're probably going to get a lesser rate than you would if you were to base it on sales rather than
And
pure
sales.
volume,
Yeah.
right? So, so let's talk about a couple of key things because everybody wants to make money and they want to make money fast, and so they think one way of doing it is try to get an upfront fee or an advance, which can have a lot of implications. So, let me think. There are a couple factors. You can ask for or request an upfront payment or an advance against future royalties. Okay. Then there's a concept of a minimum guarantee or minimum royalty. I'm going to kind of break those up. So if you have a licensing arrangement where after you've done all the numbers and you understand volume and when it's going to sell and how it's going to sell and all these aspects of it, and you've determined that, the expectation is they're going to move 50,000 units in year one, and to you that equates to, let's just be fun, a $1 million check, okay? I hope that could happen for all of you. But then you say, but I'm really strapped for cash. I got, some more patent stuff I got to go clear up, or I got my lawyer that, is hounding me for money or whatever, right? Can I get an advance on my royalty? Some will do that. But again, you're just taking money that you're going to own in the future against what you're going to take now. Some places, some companies, some partners will do that for you, but in exchange, they may also lower your royalty rate altogether. So you're not going to agree on a 10% and then say, oh, but can I have half of that up front now? They're going to go, wait a minute, time value of money here. Sorry, if you want an advance, I'm going to lower your rate to 7%. Right? So there's trade-offs. Every aspect of a licensing deal is one trade-off for another. Okay? Please let that sink in for a second. Okay? So where you make trade-offs in one area or where you think you're gaining ground in one area, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Okay? Keep that in mind. This is a game. That's why I say this is not something to be done lightly or easily or even on your own. Because if you don't understand the game, I don't play chess, but I like the analogy of it because it's so complicated, I don't get it. But the same way licensing works, if you don't make the right move, you're dead. Your game is over. Okay? So, let's see. So an upfront payment, again, is generally some amount of money that you're asking for them to pay you, as a one-time fee or whatever, to begin the process of them using your patent. Usually paid within, 30 days or upon execution of the agreement. Whether you ask for it or not is solely your decision. I don't encourage you one way or the other. If you ask for it, then we kind of start laying out all the particulars of what that means. So again, it's a discussion point. And it's definitely on a case-by-case basis. However, usually they are non-refundable, which means, okay, you got your money and they can't take it back, but that might be the only money you see. That could just be it and you could be done. Who knows? It depends on really how things go in the long run. Most of the time they will count it against future royalties. A majority of the time they're not going to say, oh yes, of course we'll give you this big chunk of money and we're still going to give you the full 10% that you asked us for. It's not going to happen. Let's see, minimum. So once you figured out all your numbers, you have an expectation or idea of how many units are going to be produced, how they're going to be sold, where they're going to be sold, how much is going to be sold. You have some sort of hockey puck idea of, you know, how this is going to just grow over the next X amount of years. There's usually a baseline that gets set, right? You have that ramp up period. And so, you know, whether or not you ask for money up front, this has nothing to do with that. What happens is you have this understanding of where you think things are going to lie on an average basis. And you say, okay, at minimum, for me, locking up my IP with you and entering into this relationship with you, I want a minimum amount every quarter, every year, whatever you agree to. And what that is that's the, you know, that's the bottom line that you should adhere to that's going to make you comfortable in having entered this relationship and not having the opportunity to break up and go somewhere else. It's the middle point. You're not going to be 100% thrilled and they're probably going to be even happier because they're going to lowball you as much as possible. And a lot of that is going to be contingent on where they are in that ramp up cycle. So, you know, your royalty is also can also be structured based on that path to commercialization. So that first 6 to 9 months is development, nothing's really happening, and then there's marketing, and then there's distribution. So, you know, it's gonna creep. Once you reach kind of that midpoint level, though, there should be some baseline because they have forecasts, they have projections, they have people they have to report to. You know, they have a, you know, a business plan. So they know where they need to be too in terms of continuing to commercialize that product in order to make it successful. So you come up with some sort of baseline number that says, at no point during any particular quarter are you going to send me a check less than X% or X dollars, right? But the caution is if that's all you're getting, then that's a problem because they're not meeting your expectations for growing and commercializing successfully that intellectual property. It also is a red flag to start going, what's going on here? Maybe I need to start auditing, or maybe I need to start checking into things, or maybe you're not the right partner for me. So those are some kind of things to consider. It's, like I said, it's kind of like the bare minimum of what you would expect to maintain that relationship, but not without its own, you know, flaws and faults. And again, the royalty payment, you know, usually they're based quarterly, so, you know, an average rule of thumb is, you know, end of each quarterly period, they'll close their books, they'll run their numbers, they'll do their thing, and then maybe about 45 days later, you'll see your check in the mail, 45 to 60 days later. So, it's not fast, okay? You also, one of the other reasons for having a tax accountant in your pocket is to help you understand how to read these reports, because along with your big fat paycheck should come a report. And that report should give you detailed information, and you can help dictate what that information looks like. You know, how many were sold, what was the period, how were they sold, where were they sold, you know, so you get basically a breakdown to understand, you know, how did they derive at that number, because it's good to know that number, because you need to then possibly go in and use an accountant or a professional to do some auditing to make sure that you got what you were supposed to get. Make sure that things aren't being, sorry, I got this new phone.
Are those your royalty checks coming in?
Yeah. I know, cha-ching. I just,
Make sure you build that in your contract.
Text.
Text, yeah.
Text alert.
I
Text
literally
alert.
got this phone 30 minutes before we got here
Oh,
today,
wow.
so.
Okay.
I don't
Is
know
that
what
an
it's doing.
S11? I mean, an Apple,
It's not an Apple, it's this new Samsung. whatever.
good.
So,
S11.
anyway, sorry, train of thought. Where was I?
How amenable are companies to, when you say, listen, we want to audit, you know,
I know.
I don't think this amount that you sold is accurate, or we just want to make sure that it is accurate. You know, how does that work? That you really know they sold those things?
So the question is, how amenable are companies to being audited? They're not. They hate it.
Yeah, I would think so.
They will actually more than likely put in the contract a limit on the number of times that you can audit them. Sometimes it's once per year, generally twice per year, because it's interruptive to their business. You know, they gotta set aside your books, separate your financials from everything else that they do, and get people in, and you know, it's not fun for anybody. The other aspect of it is it's costly, right? And so what you generally see too is, okay, I reserve the right to audit, you know, the applicable books and records pertaining to these transactions and this agreement on no more than twice on an annual basis. However, if the audit reveals an underpayment or overpayment by X%, then who pays for the cost of that audit? So you gotta be careful also then, when you trigger an audit, you may end up paying for the cost of that audit. And your costs are gonna be less significant than their costs. So also keep that in mind. So if you do trigger an audit, be sure that you have a substantiated reason to trigger an audit, and that your accountant or whomever agrees with you kind of moving down that path. Okay?
I
Yeah.
have a question. So on triggers, if the minimums aren't met, can you then, does that set a period for you to back out or get out of that licensing agreement, or is it set to return?
So good question. The question was, if someone is not meeting their minimum, you know, basically what are your options? Can you get out of the agreement? Yes, if you built them in, right? So there are a lot of triggers to, going back to my lovely analogies, getting married, right? You got all kinds of reasons to get out of that, but you got to build them in to the contract, right? So, you know, they're in general contract language, you know, there's what we call material breach, right? And they're usually someone's going bankrupt, or, you know, not able to pay their debts and blah, blah, blah. But you could put in other things like that. And so not only is not paying your royalties on time, in full, you know, whether it's the minimum or at any point, I wouldn't say just the minimum, right? I would say not paying your royalties on time as set forth for, you know, for, you know, 2 or 3 consecutive times, or not even consecutive, X number of times per year, right? Because what happens is, so when you have a contract and you say, you are to pay me net 30 days from invoice date or close of quarter or whatever, right? Okay, I forgot to pay you, or I intentionally didn't pay you. Well, then there's generally language in the contract that says, okay, well, technically you're in default, but I have to send you a notice of default that says, hey, you're now 2 days past paying me my royalty, you're now in default. I got to go through the process of sending you that notice. Then, usually per the contract, they have 10 days then to cure or make it right. So then by the time they do that, then, okay, now I've made it, now it's basically, I've gone, you know, I've resolved that, you know, sorry, no harm, no foul, we're good now, right? So you don't want to just leave that in. You just don't want to leave it up to standard, okay, you're in default of payment, I'm going to send you notice of breach, you're going to play your 10-day game, and then you're going to cure it, and then, okay, now we're happy again. You probably want to build in other things in there that says, if you have failed to pay more than twice in any period, then, you know, let's talk about, you know, what the next steps are, what the remedies are, or you charge them a penalty, or you charge them interest, right? But yeah, you always want to, you know, in prior presentations, I always talk about the breakup language. You always have to have solid, clear breakup language in that contract to understand, you know, what are those triggers, right? And definitely not getting paid is one of them, right? So, let's see. Okay, I think I covered all of those. Any questions on this? Yeah.
Leslie, typically speaking, how often would, let's say, a company pay you? Is there a set amount, like once a month, maybe once every year?
No, you're lucky if you get quarterly, because it's just labor intensive to do payouts on a monthly basis. Most will push for semi-annual, but if you can get to quarterly, that's great. I definitely wouldn't go annually, because that's a long time to wait. But yeah, I mean, you can always ask for monthly, but not likely you're gonna get monthly.
That percentage increases the older you get.
So other factors that influence your royalty rate, like I said, there are lots of things. This is not universal, this is not one size fits all, this is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, one thing affects another. Here are other things that affect how much you may get paid a royalty rate. And part of it is your reputation as an inventor, what past successes you may have had, were you a previous CEO of a company, what kind of legitimacy, do you have in that particular market space? Maybe you're, some world-renowned scientist or, winner of some huge award or something like that, something that gives you clout. I mean, that has bearing, right? If you come in there and your hair's all light socket, shocked out, and you look like Albert Einstein without the cred, they're probably going to go, who is this person, right? Your past your development experience, and of course the value that you might bring. And in many situations, just because you're licensing your product, you don't always walk away at that point. Sometimes they'll bring you into the company as an advisor, or in some sort of advisory or consultancy role, and that's highly lucrative, because not only could that add to the value that you're getting from a royalty perspective, but you could also earn money as a consultant from that company as well. So, how good you are in the game is a big factor. Whether the invention itself possesses, great novelty or great ingenuity, how fascinating, and what that potential means to that product. Could have influence over the royalty rate. If it covers a large territory, so going back to whether or not they're filed in the U.S. versus and or international, that also has bearing. If you're dealing with a multinational company or companies, one or more companies who are in those specific areas or regions. If you're not, then no bearing. But if you're trying to deal with a multinational company, and if you look at their breakdown of sales, they have strong sales in Europe, and second place is the U.S., but you only have protection in the U.S., well, they're not really going to be able to fully maximize that commercialization. So, that could be a trade-off. You'll hear David talk about, the strength and breadth of the claims of your invention. If it's a well-written patent that either is highly likely to be issued and or has issued, then that's all going to have bearing on the influence on the amount of the royalty that you receive. If you did a do-it-yourself, that's probably going to lower the rate, because a couple things. If it has not yet issued, then you're likely to have office objections and may have challenges to getting the patent issued if you're in provisional stage. Not provisional, provisional stage. But then also, if someone attempts to challenge your intellectual property, whether due to an infringement action or likelihood of infringement, or simply they want to go out and make your life difficult, if that patent is not well written and the breadth of the claims is not strong, then that may have issues unto itself. But then also looking at it from the other side of it, if it's a well-written patent with strong claims and breadth of form, then going back to kind of that razor blade model, you may be able to expand that IP into other market opportunities that you may not have originally thought of. And so it's kind of like that, well, if I just do this, or maybe maybe I could take the same blade and use it as a peeler for oranges, right? That could be an opportunity if your claims helped you get down that path, right? If it somehow didn't include the things that you might need to get you there, then you may be limited. But that's always something to think about and can definitely add value to your intellectual property and your royalty. Anticipated market life. So think about today. In this age of the internet and everything is fast and everybody knows about everything, you know, and what's here today is gone tomorrow, and fads and trends and blah, blah, blah. And technology. It all is rapidly changing. So going back to, you know, patents, whether or not to seek a patent on something that may not have longevity in the marketplace. Remember, patents are good generally for 20 years, right? But if this only, you know, if you're basing this on technology that exists today and is going to change in 2 years or 5 years, maybe you don't want to go down that road. Maybe you want to look at other avenues to get that product to commercialization. Even if you went down the path of getting a patent and you found someone to partner with, they may take that into consideration as well and say, all right, great, it's going to take me 18 months to get this to market. This technology changes every 5 years. I don't want a 20-year license deal with you or a 10-year licensing arrangement with you. I want a 2-year or a 5-year. And rather than 10%, we're looking more at like 4%. Does that make sense? Okay. So that also has bearing. And then pervasiveness of the invention. So when I say pervasiveness is how much would, for instance, your life be changed by this? Like, think of the phone. The phone, your phone in your pockets or in your hands is pervasive. Mine going off over here is pervasive. So, you know, if it has the opportunity to be, you know, I don't want to say life-changing, but some, you know, to some degree life-changing or have a great impact on you or the environment or the marketplace or whatever, then that adds value, obviously. I know those are few and far between, but if you've got that golden ticket, if you're, you know, who's the Willy Wonka kid? Whatever his name is.
Charlie.
Charlie. If you're Charlie, then good for you. Again, going back to whether the license is exclusive or non-exclusive, that is a long, in-depth discussion that you need to have, and that's going back to whether you're monogamous with this one deal, or you have an opportunity to carve things up so that you're able to enter into relationships with many other, you know, licensees for that. And again, that can factor into the royalty rate, good and bad.
If
Yes.
you sign up with an exclusive, does that mean also you can't compete with them?
So the question is, if you sign an exclusive deal, does that also mean that you cannot compete? And generally, yes. Generally, yes, unless you have a carve-out for yourself. And then that carve-out is going to have exclusions and separations so that you're not then directly competing against each other. There's got to be some reason that you need that, and there's a differentiation between what you plan to do versus what they plan to do. And that's going to be very clear. And it's going to lower your rate. For the licensee, it could reduce. Maybe it's something that's going to, reduce their manufacturing costs, or they can utilize whatever manufacturing processes that already exist that then are able to help get this product to market faster and easier without a whole lot of capital investment and molds or materials and things like that. If it's based off resources that they already have and are highly available, then that's obviously going to result in quicker time to market, lower cost of goods, and definitely a cheaper manufacturing process. And then, of course, the anticipation of how much this is going to sell, when it's going to sell, how it's going to sell, is it seasonal? What the market is. If you're talking about a product selling to little kids, well, little kids aren't spending the money. They're trying to convince sucker their mom or dad into spending the money, right? And, so that's going to have bearing. And so also keep in mind that the more niche the product is, then the lower opportunity cost there probably is, unless it's low opportunity, high cost. Again, trade-offs, right? One goes up, pull one lever, then you gotta watch what happens to the other one. How are we doing on time? So factors that negatively impact the royalty rate. So poor, you as a licensee, this is your first time out the door. This is your first rodeo. You are making bumbling mistakes during the negotiation process. They will eat that up. They will eat that up. They are not going to point out your mistakes. Okay. So if you're not experienced, you don't know what you're doing, you don't have people with the right experience, and you're not asking the right questions, don't expect them to step up and do it for you, okay? So you can have critical mistakes in your deal based on your lack of understanding of how the deal works, or if you've never done it before. Again, same edge of the coin on your development expertise. Hey, you do, I don't know, I don't want to criticize any industry or any field, but you do one thing for a living, and this, while wonderful and great, is so far outside your realm of expertise, that could have bearing on it as well. Because how are you then to judge or gauge truly what the level of success that is going to have? You're then really relying on that potential licensee to do that for you, and that can be relatively dangerous. Take a breath here. Breath, and breath is my next topic. Yes?
I don't know if you're going to cover this or not, but what you just said about, they're going to chew you up alive. When you make that initial contact to the ABC company and you phone them, like, say you're going to make a phone call, or maybe an email, is there a preferred way to introduce yourself or your product? So, at some point you have to disclose what it is, obviously, but you want to somehow mitigate how much you disclose.
Yeah, so the question is, if you're reaching out to a prospective licensee, how much information should you be disclosing during those first conversations? And I usually say only as much as is already covered in your patent application or your issued patent. So this isn't the opportunity to run in and strip down and show them all you got, right?
Plus, it's a consumer product, so they're going to say, what is it? It's the widget, so they're going to probably see a picture of it, so you send them a PDF with the picture, and it's something, right?
Yeah.
And then it kind of goes from there.
Yeah, but there's a way to do that on a minimalistic basis, right? That's where your elevator pitch comes in. That's where your 10-second spiel. That's where your white sheet comes in, or your one sheet, or your fact sheet, whatever you want to call it. Because that's what you want to stick to. You want to stick to your script. I have developed an invention that is a handheld device that will allow you to manage PowerPoint presentations, not from your computer, blah. Okay, I'm intrigued. I don't quite get it, but tell me more later. Oh, I'd love to have that discussion with you. However, then you take it to the next step, right? So, and that, what I just said, is probably going to be exactly what's covered in my application. An invention that allows you to do this, right? So, let's see. That lacks breadth or capacity for future product line expansion. So again, is this a novelty? Is this a one-shot? Is this a coconut bra? What is it? So not just not just its own product longevity, but is there an opportunity to expand it? Going outside of the scope of maybe what you originally thought its uses were. So the random example I came up with a few moments ago, the razor, right? So you came up with the razor. It allows you to shave your legs or other parts of your body. And it's this big, but now they make them like this big, and you can use them on your eyebrows now and other parts of your body, or even bigger for, back hair, or, dogs and cats, or, or oranges, stuff like that. So if if you were to secure, some intellectual property that somehow described the invention of a blade that allowed you to strip all of these surfaces, man, that's a huge market. That's a huge opportunity. And whether or not you actually thought about all of those at the time of the invention, if the patent itself is broad, strong, and depth enough to cover some of those other areas, man, you may have a gold mine on your hand. Not just with one potential licensee, but maybe even many. Provisional or not issued. So I know there's a lot of talk in the market about being able to license your intellectual property with a provisional, which means it hasn't been issued yet. I've only filed. I don't actually have something that says you are now a patent holder. And yes, it can be done, but there are trade-offs to that. You know, you may not get that guarantee that you're looking for. You may not get that high royalty rate that you're looking for. The deal may be shorter, or it may come with a lot of contingencies. Because if you know, in the end of the day, if it does not get issued, or the claims are reduced, then the opportunity for that licensee are also reduced thereby, and so then you may not have the same deal that you thought you were going into. So definitely stronger when you have an issued patent versus when you only have a patent application filed.
But if you're first to market making killer sales, wouldn't that help though in the interim?
Yeah, so that's different in a couple of aspects. The question was, but if you're first to market, does that help? Absolutely, particularly
With
in...
good sales, obviously.
Yeah, first to market with good sales. So yeah, you know, if you have something that's short term or novelty, but you can produce it fast, get it out there fast, promote it fast, sell it fast, by all means do it, because things change all the time.
And then the patent gets issued, so then it's worth...
Then it can be worth more. Yeah. So again, trade-offs, good, bad. You got to pull both levers and see what happens, but make sure that you understand when you pull one what it means for the other one. Yes.
What did you say about claims being reduced?
Claims being reduced. So as you're going through the patent prosecution process, you know, you may have a patent with 20 claims because you think it covers this, and the office says, yeah, I'll give you 15 of those, and I'm going to toss out your other 5. There are other things you can do to try to get those 5 back, but if whoever you're partnering with thought you were going to get all 20 because it was something really cool about those other 5, and probably had more bearing than the other ones, then they may go, oh, but you didn't get all 20, so maybe we don't have a deal after all, or, you know, it's just a lot of different factors to think about. Let's see, manufacturing costs, go-to-market costs. We talked about those quite a bit. If you're talking about brand new startup on lines and going to have vet new contract manufacturers, and that's all cost intensive. Your ramp up time to getting the product to market is going to be longer, and it's certainly going to increase burdens of cost across the board. And I think we talked about most of the other ones. And it does, of course, anticipated competition, right? So it's not just a matter of how quickly things can be knocked off, right? But, you know, where is the other competition, and where are they, and how in their product cycle, you know, how fast do they produce products that, you know, could essentially even be better than what you've done without actually even knocking you off, which can definitely happen, depending on, again, the breadth, depth, and solidness of your IP. Here's some more, and then we're getting kind of to the tail end of it. So we talked about returns. Marketing activities is certainly one element of it. Marketing and promotion, and how much you allow any contributions or set-asides. Sometimes you'll see a requirement that they take, you know, 2%, 5%, 10%, and set that aside solely for marketing and promotional purposes, of which maybe you allow 1% or 0.5% of your royalty to go towards that, to help kind of put some skin in the game and encourage them to do something. You know, those are certainly carve-outs that are sometimes made. You know, encouragement to get the product developed faster, or somehow engaging or aiding in getting the product developed. Certainly, again, those patent activities, you know, what's going on at that particular time with your patent, whether or not it's issued or in prosecution. Sometimes you can ask for you know, assistance in those funds. But again, trade-offs, 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 trade-offs. Okay. So some key takeaway points, as I've said, I don't know, probably 10 times. You know, licensing deals are not universal. They're not one size fits all. They're not, I don't believe they're do-it-yourself. All these other factors and more, This is not all of them by any stretch. But, you know, these are all things that have to be taken into consideration when you're structuring your deal. You know, again, the start of the conversation, I said, you know, a lot of people go and thinking about how much money am I going to make tomorrow, right? And thinking of it as a percentage. You got to look at all the factors first before you can think about percentage or land on a number, right? If you walk in saying, I'm expecting 10%, you're going to get laughed out of the room. 10% of what? How? We haven't even had a conversation. I don't even know how much this is going to cost to make. I don't even know where we're going to make it, how we're going to make it, where we're going to sell it. And you're asking me for 10% right off the bat?
Don't worry, I'll take care of you.
Yeah, sure. You know, while there are industry standards, while there are targets, while they'll say, you know, royalty rate can be anywhere from 3 to 14%, and you go, wow, I want 15. It doesn't work that way. So, you know, you can talk about the target percentages. You can go in with some information. Oh, in this industry, it's usually 3%. In this industry, it's usually 6 to 8%. And this, you know, fine. Use it as a baseline, but don't make it your number going in, because you're going to get frustrated. And you're going to kind of come off looking a little clownish almost. Again, I can't stress not having, you know, the right people with you as you go through these negotiations and these discussions, understanding what the trade-offs are, definitely understanding what the tax implications and the ramifications are to you, both as an individual or if you're starting a company. If you get that advance, what that advance is going to look like on your tax year, when you get that 1099, and then you're going to go, uh-oh, what happened? Because whatever you think you got last year or whatever you paid last year, it's going to greatly be impacted by whatever you receive after that first check. So, any questions? I know we answered quite a bit going in. Yes?
Have you ever seen a deal where people ask for stock options to avoid immediate gain?
I'm sorry?
Have you ever seen a deal where someone asks for stock options?
So the question was, have I ever seen a deal where the company is offered, or the person's offered stock options? Equity, yes. I've been involved in 1 or 2 of those myself.
Good.
They haven't always panned out.
That's a better tax arrangement.
It could be, but then you're looking for a hopeful future, long-term, viable, highly successful opportunity to come along and really where you can make your money, right? That's providing the company goes public if they're not already public. But then a lot of ways, as I personally know, to sell a company and not have to pay out those shares and those costs to people.
Well, options are free for the companies.
Yeah. Well,
They're also not taxable till you get paid.
yeah. So, you know, yes, there are options to take in some sort of equity interest as a trade-off to your deal, but lots of other implications that go along with that. And there's no guarantee that anything's going to, those are as good as the paper that they're written on at that particular moment in time until they turn into dollar bills, which don't always happen. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, typically when you get an offer or something, a contract, do you get to sign it right there? Can you just like take it home? And
Do not sign as soon as they give it to you. You have to mull it over. You have to think about it. Do not be pressured into this must be done by this date without having all the right conversations.
Are there people, someone has a service that can help you look over it?
They're lawyers.
Yeah, attorneys.
Nathan Watkins right there next door.
Right next door.
Yeah. Yep. Any other questions?
Have you been brought into some of these meetings as an advisor to talk about all these little details? Or is it just, does a person talk to an attorney?
So the question is, have I been brought into meetings to discuss all these details? Yes, but I generally try to get all these details out of the way with you beforehand. So, no, I'm not promoting myself here, but you know, when I work with you, if I choose to work with you, in addition to something similar to what you see before you, the worksheet, I have an extended worksheet where I ask you all kinds of questions along these lines, and we kind of talk about trade-offs and implications. And what we try to do is create kind of like, okay, here's my baseline, but if this, then I would like to see this. If this happens, then I want to trade off here. So we try to work through a couple of scenarios so that when you go into the negotiations, you know, on your own or with whomever, you have an understanding of where you want to be, where you're coming to the table from, and then maybe some potential fallbacks. But if you stray outside of those fallbacks, then you go, you know what? I appreciate the feedback, and you certainly give me something to consider. I'd like to go back and talk to my partners about this, so that you're not trying to make decisions on the fly where you don't understand how that lever got pulled and you ended up somewhere you didn't want to be. Okay. Any other questions?